The true scale of the universe tonight, before numbers and distances and names begin to pile up. I want you to pause for a moment. Not to learn anything new, but to let go of what you think you already understand. Because this is not a lesson, and it is not a test of knowledge. This is an experience. One that works best when you allow it to unfold slowly, without resistance. Without the need to grasp or categorize every idea the moment it appears. You are here, right now, on a world that feels solid, familiar, and immense. Your life has been shaped by distances you can walk, skies you can see, and horizons that feel far enough to suggest something endless. Your mind has learned to trust what your senses report. Up feels up, down feels down, near feels manageable. Far feels distant, and everything meaningful seems to exist within those boundaries. That way of seeing has served you well. It kept your ancestors alive. It helped you navigate forests, oceans, cities, and societies. But it also quietly trained you to think that reality itself operates on the same scale as your daily experience. What we are about to explore challenges that assumption, not by telling you that your perspective is wrong, but by showing you that it is incomplete. Scale has a way of doing that. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It simply reveals. And when it does, the effect is rarely intellectual at first. It is emotional, disorienting, sometimes even unsettling. Because when scale shifts, identity tends to follow. You might think you know your place in the universe. Most of us feel, at least vaguely, that we are small in the grand scheme of things. We hear that idea often enough that it becomes familiar, almost comforting. But familiarity is not the same as understanding. Knowing something as a phrase is very different from feeling it as a truth. Tonight is not about repeating the idea that Earth is small or that the universe is big. It is about allowing those ideas to become real in a way they usually do not. As this journey unfolds, you may notice moments where your intuition falters, where comparisons stop making sense, where words like large and far lose their meaning. That is not a failure on your part. It is a sign that you are approaching scales. Your mind was never designed to navigate effortlessly. Human intuition evolved for survival on a single planet, not for comprehending a cosmos that stretches beyond imagination. When that intuition begins to strain, it means you are on the edge of something important. I want you to approach what follows not as a viewer consuming information, but as a participant undergoing perspective. There is no destination you need to reach, no conclusion you need to hold on to. Let the images form. Let the ideas stack quietly. Let yourself feel the gradual shift as familiar reference points begin to dissolve. This is not about being overwhelmed. It is about being widened. By the time we finish, nothing about your daily life will have physically changed. You will still be where you are. The world will still look the same when you step outside. But something subtle may be different. When you understand scale, many anxieties shrink alongside it. Not because they disappear, but because they are finally seen in context. So, take a breath. Set aside the impulse to rush ahead. For the next while, allow yourself to drift with the questions rather than chase the answers. We are about to begin very close to home, in the only place that has ever felt central. And from there, step by step, we will move outward, not to diminish meaning, but to discover where it truly resides. Before we go any further, it helps to recognize why this kind of journey matters at all. Perspective is not just an abstract concept. It shapes how you relate to everything around you. When the frame is small, problems feel absolute, victories feel permanent, and losses feel final. When the frame expands, those same experiences do not lose their importance, but they gain context. They become part of a much larger story, one that is not centered on urgency or fear. Scale has a way of softening the sharp edges of thought. This is why people throughout history have looked to the sky not only for answers, but for grounding. Long before telescopes or equations, humans sensed that looking outward did something inward. It reminded them that existence was larger than any single moment. Tonight, you are stepping into that same tradition, but with tools of imagination rather than instruments of stone or glass. As we move forward, resist the urge to measure yourself against what you encounter. This is not about comparison in the sense of better or worse, larger or smaller in value. It is about proportion. About seeing how your life fits within layers of structure that extend far beyond anything you can touch, while still somehow including you. That paradox is part of what makes this exploration meaningful. Nothing here requires belief, only attention, only patience, only a willingness to sit with ideas that may feel too large at first, trusting that understanding does not arrive all at once. It accumulates like distance covered step by step. And with that in mind, we can begin. Your mind is extraordinary, but it was not built for this. That might sound like a limitation, yet it is the reason you are here at all. The human brain did not evolve to comprehend galaxies, light years, or the architecture of the universe. It evolved to keep a fragile body alive on a single planet, navigating threats that were immediate, visible, and local. Every instinct you rely on was shaped by that narrow requirement. For most of human history, survival depended on understanding what was close. Food within reach, shelter within sight. Danger that could be heard, smelled, or seen moving through the grass. Your brain became exceptionally good at judging distances you could walk, objects you could throw, and timescales measured in days, seasons, and years. Anything beyond that offered no evolutionary advantage. There was no benefit in grasping the size of a star or the distance between worlds when a single misstep could mean death. Because of that, your intuition is deeply biased toward the familiar. It treats what you can see as significant and what you cannot as abstract or irrelevant. This bias is so ingrained that it feels like common sense. When something is far away, it feels less real. When something is large but unseen, it feels conceptual rather than physical. Your mind quietly assumes that if it cannot interact with something directly, it does not need to fully understand it. This works beautifully at human scales. It allows you to function, to plan, to care, and to focus. But it begins to fail the moment you leave that narrow range, not gradually. Abruptly, when distances stretch beyond travel and sizes exceed comparison, intuition does not adapt, it collapses. The brain does not scale up smoothly, simply stops offering reliable guidance. You have probably noticed this before without naming it. Numbers like 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, and 1,000,000,000,000 feel similar, even though they are wildly different. 1,000 seconds feels manageable. 1,000,000 seconds is about 12 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is more than 30 years. Intellectually, you may know this, but emotionally, those figures blur together. Your intuition flattens them because it has no framework to hold them apart. This flattening creates a quiet illusion, makes vast differences seem modest, and extreme scales feel abstract. When you hear that a star is millions of kilometers across, or that a galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars, your mind registers the words without fully processing the meaning. There is no internal image that matches the claim. So the idea passes through you without friction, leaving your sense of reality largely unchanged. That is not a flaw. It is a boundary. And boundaries matter because they shape what feels possible, important, and real. When your intuitive framework ends, understanding does not automatically continue. It must be guided. This is where cognitive dissonance begins to emerge. You hold two ideas at once that do not sit comfortably together. On one hand, Earth feels vast, central, and substantial. On the other, you are told it is a tiny fragment of something incomprehensibly larger. Both ideas seem true. Yet they cannot occupy the same mental space without tension. That tension is not something to avoid. It is a signal that your perspective is stretching. Your expectations about reality were built from repetition. You learned how the world works by seeing the same patterns over and over. Day follows night. Objects fall downward. Distance requires effort. Scale grows slowly. The universe violates these expectations relentlessly. Distances exist that no effort can cross. Sizes exist that make comparison meaningless. Time unfolds on scales where entire species appear and vanish like brief sparks. When expectation fails, authority becomes important. Not authority in the sense of command, but in the sense of trust. You need a steady guide, a structure that replaces instinct with reference. Without that, the mind retreats, dismissing what it cannot integrate. This is why raw facts alone rarely change perspective. Information without scaffolding overwhelms rather than enlightens. Guided comparison is the bridge between instinct and comprehension. It does not force the mind to leap beyond its limits. It walks it there step by step. It replaces intuition with proportion, anchoring unfamiliar scales to familiar ones. This is how understanding grows, where instinct cannot follow. As you move forward, notice when something feels unbelievable, not because it is false, but because your mind has no place to put it. That feeling is not confusion. It is transition. You are leaving the territory your brain evolved to navigate and entering one. It can only explore through patience and structure. Nothing about this process diminishes you. In fact, recognizing the limits of intuition is a form of clarity. It allows you to see that feeling small or disoriented in the face of scale is not weakness. It is honesty. The universe is not obliged to fit the shapes your mind prefers. Once you accept that, something subtle changes. You stop expecting reality to feel comfortable. You stop measuring truth by how intuitive it seems. And in that space, perspective begins to expand, not by force, but by alignment. You are no longer asking your instincts to do a job they were never meant to perform. This is the mindset you need for what comes next. Not certainty, mastery. Just a willingness to let familiar instincts step aside while a different kind of understanding takes shape. From here on, scale will no longer be something you hear about. It will become something you feel, slowly and deliberately, as the frame continues to widen. From where you stand, Earth does not feel small. It feels expansive, heavy with distance and time, filled with places you will never see and routes you will never travel. Even the idea of crossing it carries a sense of effort that borders on the impossible. Mountains rise high enough to alter the weather around them. Oceans stretch so far that standing on one shore, the other feels like an abstraction. Deserts, forests, ice sheets, cities, and plains all coexist on a surface that seems endlessly varied and overwhelmingly large when you experience it directly. Think about movement at the scale of a human body. Walking across a city can take hours. Crossing a country can take days or weeks. Crossing an ocean requires machines, planning, fuel, and trust in systems you cannot personally control. Even with modern technology, travel remains something you feel in your body. Jet lag lingers. Time zones disorient you. Fatigue reminds you that distance is not just a number, but a lived experience. The planet resists easy traversal, and that resistance reinforces the feeling that Earth is immense. Geography deepens that impression. The surface of the planet is not smooth or simple. It folds, fractures, erodes, and rebuilds itself over spans of time far longer than a human life. Mountain ranges take millions of years to rise. Rivers carve valleys grain by grain. Coastlines shift, glaciers advance and retreat, and continents drift so slowly that you never feel them move, yet fast enough to reshape the world entirely. From your perspective, these features feel permanent. as if the planet itself is a fixed stage on which life briefly appears. Time reinforces this sense of dominance. Earth has been here long before you and will remain long after you are gone. Civilizations rise and fall while the planet continues its steady rotation. A single day feels reliable, a rhythm you can count on. Seasons return with predictability. Years stack into decades, decades into centuries. The stability of these cycles makes Earth feel not only large, but dependable, like a vast container that holds every story that matters. Your senses are tuned to this scale. You see horizons measured in kilometers, not thousands of kilometers. You feel gravity pulling you downward with constant certainty. You hear storms approaching and feel temperature shift with altitude and latitude. When the ground shakes, it feels like the world itself is reacting. Earth is not an abstract object beneath your feet. It is a presence, one that asserts itself through weather, terrain, and physical limitation. From this vantage point, it makes sense that Earth feels central. Every reference point in your life is anchored to it. Up and down exist because of it. Direction exists because of its rotation. Time exists because of its orbit. Even the sky, vast as it appears, feels like a dome that arches over a world that remains the primary stage. No matter how far you look, you always return to the same surface, the same gravity, the same frame. Human history reinforces this anchoring. For most of our existence, Earth was not just the only known world. It was the entire universe. The sky was a backdrop, not a destination. Stars were lights, not places. The ground beneath your feet was everything that mattered, and beyond it was mystery without consequence. That worldview was not ignorance. It was alignment with lived experience. Nothing in daily life suggested that Earth was anything other than vast and complete. Even now, with maps and satellites and global positioning systems, the planet retains its sense of scale. Seeing Earth from above does not erase its size. It reframes it, but the distances remain real. A globe in a classroom may fit in your hands, but the reality it represents does not. That small model hides the effort required to move across its surface, the time required to cross its oceans, and the energy locked into its systems. This is the anchoring bias at work, though you rarely notice it. Your mind treats Earth as the baseline against which everything else is measured. Big means bigger than a mountain. Far means farther than you can travel. Old means older than recorded history. Earth sets the scale because it is the environment in which your understanding formed. Anything that fits within that framework feels real. Anything that exceeds it begins to feel theoretical. This grounding is not something to discard. It is the foundation from which perspective grows. Without it, scale would be meaningless. You need to know what large feels like before you can understand what larger means. You need to know what distance costs in time and effort before you can grasp distances that defy travel entirely. Earth provides that reference, not as an error to be corrected, but as a starting point. As you sit with this, notice how complete the world feels at this level. Every concern you have exists here. Every relationship, every ambition, every fear and hope is embedded in this single sphere of land and water. It is enough to occupy a lifetime. It feels unreasonable to imagine that it could be anything other than significant. And yet, this feeling of dominance comes not from absolute size, but from proximity. Earth fills your awareness because it surrounds you. It defines your limits because you live inside it. Its largeness is experiential, not comparative. It feels big because you are small relative to it, not because it is large relative to everything else. That distinction matters. For now, let Earth be as it feels. Vast, substantial, all-encompassing. This is the scale your mind understands best, the one it trusts without question. We are not here to deny that experience, only to hold it gently, knowing it is the first layer of a much larger frame. Because soon, that familiar sense of immensity will begin to shift. Not abruptly, not dismissively, but gradually, as new reference points are introduced. Earth will remain what it is beneath your feet, but its place will change. And when that happens, the feeling of largeness you associate with it will not vanish. It will simply be recontextualized, anchored to something even wider. Up close, Earth feels immeasurable. But the moment you begin to measure it, something subtle changes. The planet does not resist numbers, it submits to them. What once felt endless becomes bounded, not because it has grown smaller, but because it has been translated into a language your mind processes differently. Measurement does not deny experience, it reframes it. Start with a single line drawn around the planet's middle. The circumference of Earth at the equator is just under 25,000 miles. That number may sound large, but notice how quickly it becomes manageable once spoken aloud. It fits neatly into a sentence. It can be divided, compared, reduced. Suddenly, Earth has an edge you can trace, a length you can imagine traversing. The planet that once felt like an infinite surface now has a perimeter you could, at least in theory, walk. When you convert that distance into time, the shift becomes more pronounced. A steady walking pace, 8 hours a day, could take you around the world in a few years. Long enough to feel daunting, but short enough to be conceivable. The mind latches on to that possibility. What was once vast now feels navigable. Measurement has quietly pulled Earth closer. Surface area continues this process. About 197 million square miles. Again, the number is large, yet oddly compact. You can break it into regions, countries, grids. You can imagine standing on 1 square mile at a time, spending a second in each, and finishing in a human lifetime. The planet begins to feel like something that can be cataloged, segmented, known. This is where abstraction starts to work against intuition. Numbers strip away texture. Mountains lose height and become elevations. Oceans lose depth and become volumes. Forests become percentages. The living, resisting Earth you experience with your senses turns into a set of dimensions that fit cleanly into tables and diagrams. Nothing about the planet has changed, yet your relationship to it has. Scale models accelerate this effect. When Earth is reduced to the size of a globe on a desk, the mind accepts the substitution without protest. You understand that the model represents something larger. But emotionally, the representation begins to replace the reality. You spin the globe with a finger and continents slide past effortlessly. Distances that once required fuel and time now vanish in a moment. Earth becomes something you can hold, turn, and control. This is not deception. It is efficiency. Models exist because the real thing is too large to interact with directly, but each reduction carries a cost. With every layer of abstraction, Earth loses weight in the mind. It becomes less dominant, less imposing, less absolute. The very tools that help you understand the planet also begin to shrink it psychologically. Contrast sharpens the effect. When you hear Earth's diameter stated as roughly 8,000 miles, it sounds impressive in isolation. But the number itself invites comparison. 8,000 is not an extreme figure in a world filled with millions and billions. The mind instinctively asks, what comes next? What is larger? What exceeds this scale? Measurement opens the door to hierarchy. Authority plays a role here as well. Numbers feel final, precise. They carry a sense of certainty that experience alone does not. When something is measured, it feels settled, as if its place has been fixed. This can be comforting, but it also limits the emotional space the object occupies. Earth stops being boundless and becomes defined. None of this happens abruptly. There is no single moment where Earth suddenly feels small. Instead, there is a gradual erosion of scale. Each number trims a little more of the awe that proximity created. Each comparison nudges the planet away from the center of your internal map. The destabilization is gentle, almost polite. You may not even notice it happening. What you are experiencing is not loss of meaning, but a shift in reference. Earth is moving from being the measure of all things to being one thing that can be measured. That distinction matters. Once something can be fully described, it no longer feels infinite. Once it fits within known bounds, it becomes part of a larger framework. This is why numbers feel both empowering and unsettling. They grant understanding while quietly dissolving mystery. They reassure you that the world can be grasped, even as they reveal that what you grasp may be smaller than you thought. The planet you stand on remains vast by human standards. But measurement has introduced a new perspective, one that no longer relies on lived effort alone. As this transition unfolds, pay attention to the feeling it produces. Not fear, not wonder exactly, but a subtle recalibration. Earth is still your home. Gravity still holds you. Distance still costs time and energy, yet something has shifted. The planet now exists simultaneously as experience and abstraction, as presence and proportion. This duality is important. It prepares you for what comes next. Because once Earth can be measured, it can be compared. And once it can be compared, it can be placed within a wider context. The numbers do not tell that story yet, but they have made it possible. They have loosened Earth from its position as the unquestioned center. You are still grounded here. Nothing has been taken away. But the frame has expanded just enough to allow the first cracks of perspective to form. Earth has not grown smaller beneath your feet. It has grown smaller in your mind. And that is the beginning of a much larger shift. One that will continue as new scales enter the picture and familiar reference points slowly give way to something far broader than intuition alone can hold. Earth does not exist alone, but its nearest companion already begins to challenge how you think about space. The moon feels close in a cultural sense. You see it often. It hangs in the sky with quiet familiarity, cycling through phases that mark time in ways humans have noticed for as long as we have been here. Because it looks reachable, it feels nearby. But the feeling is misleading. The average distance between Earth and the Moon is about 238,000 miles. That number is easy to say and difficult to feel. It is far enough that light takes more than a second to cross it, yet close enough that the Moon dominates our night sky. The mind struggles to place this distance because it sits in an uncomfortable middle ground. Too large to be intuitive, too small to feel cosmic. And yet it is already enough to expose something important. Imagine shrinking Earth to the size of a basketball. At that scale, the Moon would be roughly the size of a tennis ball. That part feels reasonable. What usually goes missing is the space between them. In this same model, the Moon would not hover just beside the basketball. It would sit more than 25 feet away. That gap, empty and silent, is the real story. You could line up about 30 Earths side by side in the space between the two. Most illustrations do not show this. They compress the distance for convenience, unintentionally hiding the truth. That truth is emptiness. Space is not crowded. It is not filled with objects waiting to be encountered. Even here, in our immediate neighborhood, space is overwhelmingly nothing. The Moon orbits Earth through a vast region where there is no air, no sound, no structure, just separation. The fact that our nearest celestial neighbor is so far away relative to its size is the first clear signal that the universe operates differently than daily experience suggests. This emptiness is difficult to internalize because it contradicts how your senses work. On Earth, space is rarely empty. Even when you stand alone, air fills the gap. Sound travels. Light reflects. On a clear night, the sky looks full, dotted with stars that appear evenly scattered. Your mind reads that pattern as density, but that is an illusion created by distance and brightness, not proximity. Between Earth and the Moon, there is almost nothing. No landmarks, no gradual transition. Just an abrupt absence of the medium you are used to moving through. When astronauts traveled there, they did not pass through layers of space. They crossed a void. For 3 days, they moved through darkness, interrupted only by Earth shrinking behind them and the Moon growing ahead. Nothing in between. This isolation reframes scale in a quiet way. Earth already begins to feel less dominant when you realize how much empty space surrounds it. Not because the planet has changed, but because it is no longer filling your mental frame. It is now one object separated from another by distance so large that the emptiness itself becomes noticeable. The Moon's size reinforces this effect. It is large enough to matter. It shapes tides, stabilizes Earth's tilt, and has influenced the planet's history in ways that reach into biology and climate. And yet, despite its importance, it is small enough that Earth still feels like the main presence. This balance makes the Earth-Moon system feel special, almost intimate. But intimacy here is deceptive. Even in this closest relationship, space dominates. Pause and imagine the distance again, not as a number, but as a journey. No landmarks. No gradual scenery. It's just acceleration, silence, and time. Even at incredible speed, the crossing is not instantaneous. The gap insists on being acknowledged. It cannot be ignored or compressed without losing meaning. This is the first moment where scale begins to shift from size to separation. Earth may be large compared to you, but distance cares nothing for size. It exists independently, indifferent to how significant objects feel. Two worlds can be gravitationally linked and still be separated by a gulf that dwarfs both. Once you notice this, it becomes difficult to unsee. The sky stops feeling like a ceiling and starts feeling like depth. The Moon no longer feels perched above Earth. It feels removed, held in place by invisible forces across a wide expanse of nothing. And if this much emptiness exists between two objects that feel close, what must exist between everything else? This is where curiosity takes hold. Not excitement, but a quiet unease mixed with wonder. If space is already this empty here, what happens as you move farther out? How quickly does separation overwhelm size? How soon does Earth stop feeling like a central anchor and start feeling like an isolated point? The Earth-Moon system does not answer those questions fully. It introduces them gently. It gives you a first taste of a universe where objects are rare and space is abundant. Where what matters is not how big something is, but how far it is from anything else. Earth is still beneath your feet. The Moon still rises and sets. Nothing about your immediate experience has changed, but your mental map has widened. There is now a gap in it, a region of nothing you have acknowledged for the first time. That gap will grow. It will stretch beyond comfort, beyond intuition, beyond anything that feels manageable. For now, sit with this smallest of cosmic distances. Let the emptiness register. This is not the vastness people usually talk about. It is the beginning of it. The sun changes everything. Until now, Earth has been shrinking gently. Its sense of dominance softened rather than shattered. The sun does not soften. It overwhelms. It does not merely recontextualize Earth. It exposes how fragile and provisional Earth's importance really is. From your position on the surface, the sun feels distant but manageable. It rises, sets, warms, and lights the world. It feels like a feature of the sky rather than a structure that defines the system you live in. That perception is understandable. Distance disguises scale. What is far away can appear small, even when it is not. The sun's diameter is about 864,000 miles. That number alone already stretches intuition. But it is only the beginning. You could line up roughly 109 Earths across the Sun's face from edge to edge. Not stacked, not layered, side by side. Earth, which once felt vast, now becomes a unit of measurement rather than a reference point. Volume makes the disparity unavoidable. The Sun is not just wider than Earth, it is deeper in every direction. Roughly 1.3 million Earths could fit inside it. Imagine taking every mountain, every ocean, every city, every organism that has ever lived, and compressing them into a space so small that over 1 million copies of that world could disappear inside something that looks like a bright disk in the sky. This is scale shock. It is the moment when comparison stops being comfortable and starts being destabilizing. Earth does not feel like the main character anymore. It feels like a byproduct, a remnant left over from something far more substantial. Mass reinforces the message. The Sun contains more than 99% of all the mass in the solar system. Everything else combined, every planet, moon, asteroid, and comet, accounts for less than 1%. Earth is not just smaller than the Sun, it is negligible in comparison. The center of gravity, literally and figuratively, does not belong to Earth. It never did. Energy deepens this imbalance. Every second, the Sun converts hundreds of millions of tons of hydrogen into helium through nuclear fusion. This process releases an amount of energy so vast that human civilization, from its first fire to its most powerful machines, has produced only a fraction of it in total. In 1 second, the Sun outputs more energy than humanity has used in its entire history. This is not a poetic exaggeration. It is a physical reality. The Sun is not a background feature. It is an engine. A continuous explosion held in balance by gravity. Earth exists in the spillover of that process, warmed by a tiny fraction of energy that leaks outward in all directions. The distance between Earth and the Sun adds another layer, about 93 million miles. Light takes a little over 8 minutes to cross that gap. Even traveling at the fastest speeds humans have ever achieved, crossing that distance would take months. And yet, relative to what comes later, this distance is modest. That is part of what makes it deceptive. Scale stacking sharpens the effect. If Earth were reduced to the size of a peppercorn, the Sun would be about the size of a basketball. The peppercorn would sit roughly 26 feet away. In that model, Earth does not orbit close to the Sun. It drifts far out, a tiny object held in place by a massive presence it cannot escape. At this scale, Earth begins to feel less like a world and more like debris. A grain caught in a gravitational field too powerful to ignore. Its seasons, climates, and histories suddenly feel like surface details on something that exists because of a much larger structure, not alongside it. The Sun's gravity controls everything here. It dictates the paths of planets, the shape of orbits, the rhythm of years. Earth does not move freely through space. It is bound. Its motion is a response to something far more massive than itself. The sense of autonomy that Earth felt from the ground dissolves when viewed from this perspective. Authority emerges naturally here, not because the numbers are impressive, but because they are unavoidable. There is no alternative framing that restores balance. The Sun is not slightly larger. It is categorically dominant. Earth's importance does not vanish, but it becomes conditional. It exists because conditions allow it to exist, not because it holds a privileged position. Even the Sun, impressive as it is, introduces another quiet destabilization. Astronomers classify it as an ordinary star, a G-type main sequence star. Middle-aged, unremarkable by cosmic standards. There are billions like it in the galaxy. Many larger, many more energetic, many more short-lived. The object that just erased Earth's dominance is itself not exceptional. That realization lands softly at first, then grows heavier. If Earth is insignificant compared to the Sun, and the sun is ordinary. Then importance itself is shifting away from familiar anchors. Scale is no longer hierarchical in a way that favors your intuition. It is recursive. Each level diminishes the last. From Earth, the sun feels like a provider. From this wider view, Earth feels like a side effect. A thin shell of complexity riding the outskirts of a fusion reactor that neither knows nor cares that it exists. That framing is not meant to diminish meaning. It is meant to clarify structure. The sun does not revolve around Earth. Earth revolves around the sun. That truth took centuries to accept, not because it was mathematically complex, but because it displaced Earth from the center of the story. This moment echoes that shift on a deeper level, not just in motion, but in proportion. Notice what has happened quietly in your perception. Earth has not disappeared, but it no longer feels like the primary reference point. It has become one object among many, defined by its relationship to something vastly larger. This is the first time Earth truly loses dominance, not through distance, but through comparison that cannot be ignored. And yet, even here, something remains incomplete. The sun feels overwhelming, but it also feels local. It is still part of a system that feels contained. The shock has not fully settled. Because while the sun dwarfs Earth, it does not yet dissolve the sense that this system, this arrangement, might be special. That assumption will not last. Once the sun has taken its place as the dominant presence, Earth begins to look different even among its closest neighbors. The inner solar system, which once felt like a simple arrangement with Earth at its heart, slowly reveals itself as a collection of worlds that share similarities, differences, and limitations shaped by circumstance rather than destiny. Earth does not stand apart here as a singular miracle. It stands among peers. Closest to the sun is Mercury, a world so near that the star fills much of its sky. From a distance, Mercury appears modest, almost forgettable. It is smaller than Earth, denser, scarred by impacts that date back billions of years. But its true strangeness only becomes apparent when you consider its environment. With almost no atmosphere, Mercury cannot hold heat. Daytime temperatures soar high enough to melt lead, while nights plunge hundreds of degrees below freezing. A single day on Mercury lasts longer than its year. Sunrise to sunrise stretches across months. Time itself behaves differently there. Mercury is not unfinished. It is complete in its own way, simply formed too close to the sun to resemble Earth. Gravity, distance, and composition shaped it into something harsh and extreme. Looking at Mercury, Earth does not feel central. It feels positioned. Fortunate not because it is special, but because it occupies a narrow range where conditions happen to allow stability. Venus comes next, and here the illusion of uniqueness erodes further. Venus is often called Earth's twin. Similar size, similar mass, similar origin. If you stripped away atmospheres and looked only at bulk properties, the two planets would appear nearly interchangeable. This similarity is unsettling because Venus is uninhabitable in ways that defy intuition. Its thick atmosphere traps heat so efficiently that surface temperatures remain hot enough to melt metal. Day and night, pole to pole. Pressure at the surface is crushing. Clouds of sulfuric acid hide the ground from view. Venus rotates slowly and backward, its day longer than its year, its sun rising in the west. Everything about it feels hostile, yet nothing about its size or position alone explains that hostility. Venus is not a failed Earth. It is a warning written in familiar proportions. It demonstrates how small differences in starting conditions can lead to radically different outcomes. Standing beside Venus, Earth does not look like a chosen world. It looks like a narrow outcome among many possible ones. Mars, farther out, offers a different contrast. Smaller than Earth, colder, quieter, Mars feels like a world that almost made it. Ancient riverbeds and dried lake basins hint at a past where liquid water flowed across its surface. Polar ice caps grow and shrink with the seasons. Dust storms can envelop the entire planet. Mars still feels planetary in a way that resonates with Earth's story. And yet, something went wrong. Mars lost much of its atmosphere. Its magnetic field faded. Without protection from the solar wind, gases were stripped away over hundreds of millions of years. Water could no longer remain stable on the surface. What remains is a cold desert, holding evidence of habitability without the conditions to sustain it now. Mars does not feel alien in the way Mercury does, nor oppressive in the way Venus does. It feels diminished. And in that diminishment, Earth's position becomes clearer. Earth is not simply the way planets are. It is one outcome among several, shaped by mass, distance, internal dynamics, and time. Slightly smaller, and its atmosphere might have escaped. Slightly closer, and heat might have overwhelmed it. Slightly farther, and water might have frozen away. This is where normalization quietly takes hold. Earth stops feeling like the default model for rocky planets and starts feeling like one variation in a small set. Mercury shows what happens when heat dominates. Venus shows what happens when atmosphere overwhelms. Mars shows what happens when gravity and magnetism fall short. Earth sits between these extremes, balanced but not guaranteed. The more familiar these neighbors become, the more Earth's sense of exception fades. There is no sharp boundary separating it from them. No clear line where ordinary worlds end and special ones begin. Instead, there is a gradient of outcomes, each shaped by the same physical laws playing out under slightly different conditions. Relatability erodes gently here. These planets share features with Earth, but not enough to feel comforting. Familiar shapes host unfamiliar realities. Similar sizes produce incompatible environments. The mind wants Earth to stand apart, but the evidence resists that desire. Earth does not feel less meaningful. It feels less central. Even Earth's defining features begin to look less absolute. Atmospheres can thicken or thin. Magnetic fields can switch off. Water can vanish. Climate can spiral. The traits that support life here are not permanent fixtures. They are ongoing processes contingent on internal heat, orbital stability, and time. This realization carries weight. Earth's story is not one of guaranteed continuity. It is a snapshot within a long sequence of changes. The inner solar system is not a gallery of mistakes with Earth as the correct answer. It is a spectrum of possibilities, with Earth occupying a narrow and temporary zone of balance. As you step back from this lineup of rocky worlds, Earth still feels familiar, still feels like home. But the feeling has shifted. Home is no longer the center. It is one address among several in a neighborhood shaped by forces far larger than any single planet. Nothing about this diminishes the experience of living here. If anything, it sharpens it. Earth's stability is no longer assumed. It is recognized as conditional. Its life-supporting environment is not a given. It is an alignment that holds for now. By the time your attention returns to Earth after passing Mercury, Venus, and Mars, something subtle has changed. Earth no longer defines the category. It belongs to it. The inner solar system is no longer a backdrop with Earth at its heart. It is a set of worlds, each telling a different version of what it means to orbit a star. And this is still only the beginning. Up to this point, Earth has been shrinking by comparison, but it has remained tangible. It has still felt like a place, a world with surface and story. Jupiter and Saturn change that. They do not merely make Earth look small. They push it toward abstraction. In their presence, Earth stops feeling like a planet in the same category and starts feeling like an idea, something you reference rather than imagine directly. Jupiter announces itself through mass. It is not subtle. With a diameter more than 11 times that of Earth, It immediately breaks the scale your intuition has been trying to preserve. But diameter alone does not capture the shock. Volume does. You could fit roughly 1,300 Earths inside Jupiter, and even then, the fit would be tight. Not stacked in layers, not arranged carefully. Simply absorbed into a single object that does not even notice the addition. At this point, comparison becomes destabilizing. Earth is no longer something you picture next to Jupiter. It is something you count, a unit, a statistic, a way to describe how large Jupiter is, not a world that competes for attention. The mental image collapses because your mind cannot comfortably hold 1,000 Earths inside one planet. The scale is too lopsided. Jupiter's mass reinforces this imbalance. It contains more material than all the other planets in the solar system combined. Not just the rocky ones, all of them. If you remove Jupiter entirely, the architecture of the solar system would change. Orbits would shift, impacts would increase, stability itself would be altered. Earth's long history is entangled with Jupiter's presence, not as an equal, but as a dependent. Gravity is where Jupiter's dominance becomes unavoidable. Its gravitational pull shapes trajectories far beyond its own orbit. It captures comets, redirects asteroids, and influences objects millions of miles away. Earth exists within a gravitational environment that Jupiter helps define. From this perspective, Earth does not feel self-contained. It feels sheltered, indirectly protected by something vastly larger. And yet, Jupiter is not solid in the way Earth is. It has no surface you could stand on. It is a deep, churning mass of gas and liquid hydrogen, compressing inward toward pressures so extreme that matter behaves in unfamiliar ways. Storms larger than Earth rage across its atmosphere for centuries. Bands of clouds stretch wider than continents. The Great Red Spot alone could swallow Earth's whole and still have room to spare. This contrast erodes another assumption. Size does not require solidity. Importance does not require habitability. Jupiter is enormous, influential, and utterly hostile to life as you know it. Earth's significance begins to feel local rather than structural. It matters here, but not in the architecture of the system as a whole. Saturn follows, and instead of restoring balance, it deepens the sense of overwhelm. Slightly smaller than Jupiter, Saturn is still vast beyond comfortable comprehension. Over 700 Earths could fit inside it. Like Jupiter, it is a gas giant dominated by hydrogen and helium, shaped more by physics than by anything that resembles geology. Saturn's rings complicate perception further. They stretch tens of thousands of miles outward, creating a structure so large and visually striking that it seems impossible. Yet those rings are thin. In most places, no thicker than a building is tall. Scale begins to fracture in multiple directions at once. Immense width paired with extreme thinness, grandeur built from delicacy. If Saturn were shrunk to the size of a basketball, its rings would be thinner than a sheet of paper. That analogy compresses scale so aggressively that the mind almost rejects it. How can something so vast become something so fragile in representation? This is visual compression at work, forcing your intuition to stretch in opposing directions simultaneously. Jupiter and Saturn together dismantle the last remnants of Earth-centered thinking at the planetary level. Earth is no longer one of the big objects. It is not even one of the medium ones. It is a small, rocky world orbiting far from the dominant masses that truly shape the system. Its oceans, mountains, and atmospheres begin to feel like surface details on something that barely registers in comparison. The moons of these giants compound the effect. Jupiter's largest moons are worlds in their own right. Ganymede is larger than Mercury. Europa hides an ocean beneath its ice that may contain more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, has a thick atmosphere and lakes of liquid hydrocarbons on its surface. These are not minor companions. They are planetary-scale bodies orbiting something so large that they are still considered secondary. Earth has one moon. Jupiter has dozens. Saturn has more than 100. The richness of these systems makes Earth's simplicity feel stark. Not inferior, but modest. Earth no longer feels like a central actor in a diverse cast. It feels like one quiet story unfolding far from the most dramatic structures. At this point, awe stacks upon itself. Each new comparison does not replace the last. It layers on top of it. Earth is smaller than the Sun. The Sun is ordinary among stars. Earth is smaller than Jupiter. Jupiter outweighs everything else nearby. Saturn rivals Jupiter in scale, while adding complexity Earth cannot match. The pattern is clear. Every time Earth seems small, something arrives to make it smaller still. This cumulative effect matters. Awe does not come from a single fact. It comes from sustained imbalance. From realizing that the hierarchy keeps extending upward, and Earth keeps sliding downward in relative importance. Not erased, not dismissed, but consistently repositioned. Earth begins to feel conceptual here because it has lost its role as a physical anchor. You can imagine standing on Earth. You cannot imagine standing on Jupiter. You cannot imagine filling Jupiter with Earths in any intuitive way. The comparisons become symbolic rather than spatial. Earth turns into a reference marker, a way to talk about scale rather than a scale itself. And yet, even now, something remains intact. The solar system still feels like a place. Vast, yes, but bounded. Jupiter and Saturn dominate it, but they do not dissolve the sense that this system might be a meaningful unit. The Sun still anchors everything. The planets still orbit within a recognizable structure. This is important because it sets up the next shift. Earth has lost its planetary importance, but the system itself still feels like home territory. The overwhelm has grown, but it has not yet escaped containment. That will change, because beyond these giants lies not more mass, but more space. And once space becomes the dominant feature, even Jupiter and Saturn will begin to feel small. By the time you reach the outer planets, the solar system already feels vast. The familiar arrangement of inner worlds has given way to gas giants and sprawling moon systems that stretch intuition thin. It would be reasonable to assume that this is where the system ends, that beyond Saturn and its rings there is only a gradual fade into darkness. But that assumption comes from habit, not reality. The solar system does not end where planets stop. It ends where gravity finally loosens its hold, and that boundary lies far beyond anything that feels intuitive. Beyond Neptune's orbit, the sense of structure begins to blur. The neat spacing of planets gives way to a diffuse region populated by countless icy remnants. This is the Kuiper Belt, a vast, flattened disk extending outward for billions of miles. It is home to objects that never became planets. Leftovers from the system's formation that still circle the Sun in slow, distant paths. Pluto resides here, along with thousands of similar bodies, most too small and faint to be seen directly. At first, this region feels like a footnote. The objects are small, the distances are large but still measured in familiar units. Yet the sheer extent of the Kuiper Belt quietly stretches the solar system far beyond where your intuition wants it to end. Neptune is not the edge, it is a waypoint. The Sun's influence continues long after the last planet has passed. Pluto helps anchor this idea, not because it is special, but because it is known. Once considered a planet, now recognized as one of many, Pluto reveals how crowded this distant region actually is. It is only about 1/6 the diameter of Earth, yet even here, Earth feels irrelevant. The Sun that once dominated the inner system is now a bright star in Pluto's sky. And Earth is lost entirely, too small and too close to the Sun to matter at this distance. As you move outward through the Kuiper Belt, the solar system begins to feel less like a collection of objects and more like a volume. Space itself becomes the dominant feature. The distances between objects grow so large that even their presence feels incidental. You could travel for millions of miles and encounter nothing. Not emptiness punctuated by landmarks, but emptiness uninterrupted. And still, this is not the edge. Far beyond the Kuiper Belt lies a region that does not behave like the rest of the system at all. The Oort cloud is not a disk. It is a vast spherical shell surrounding the Sun in every direction, extending outward to distances so large they strain language. Its inner boundary begins thousands of times farther from the Sun than Earth is. Its outer boundary may reach nearly 2 light-years away, almost halfway to the nearest star. At this scale, the idea of a solar system changes meaning. The Sun no longer feels like the center of a compact family of worlds. It feels like a mass embedded within a much larger gravitational bubble, tenuously holding onto trillions of icy fragments that drift at the edge of its influence. Objects in the Oort cloud move so slowly and are so weakly bound that passing stars can disturb them. Some are nudged inward, becoming long-period comets. Others may be stripped away entirely, lost to interstellar space. No human eye has ever seen an Oort cloud object directly. We know it exists because of what occasionally falls out of it. Comets that appear without warning, tracing elongated paths that take them close to the Sun before flinging them back into the dark. These visitors are messages from the system's outskirts. Reminders that what feels like emptiness is still structured, still populated, just at a scale that defies everyday thinking. Now consider Earth within this framework. Earth orbits the Sun at 1 astronomical unit, a distance that once felt meaningful. Compared to the Oort cloud, it is nothing. A point buried deep inside a gravitational well that extends trillions of miles in all directions. If you tried to represent the solar system to scale with the Sun the size of a basketball, Earth would be a grain of dust orbiting within arm's reach. The Kuiper Belt would lie far beyond the room. The Oort cloud would stretch miles away. Earth is not just small here, it is invisible. Lost in a system so vast that even the Sun feels localized. The planet that once defined scale has been absorbed into a structure whose boundaries are difficult to even describe. This is boundary expansion at work. Every time you think you have reached an edge, the system opens further. What once felt like the outskirts become interior space. The concept of near dissolves. Earth is no longer near anything in a meaningful way. It exists deep within a gravitational domain that extends so far outward that its true shape cannot be seen from inside. The psychological effect of this is subtle but profound. Earth has not been destroyed or dismissed. It has simply been placed. It occupies a position that is no longer privileged by scale or location. It is not central. It is not peripheral. It is embedded. Invisibility framing becomes unavoidable here. Even if you could stand at the edge of the Oort cloud and look inward, you would not see Earth. You might barely see the Sun as a bright point against the background stars. Earth would be too close to that point, too faint, too insignificant to detect. The planet that once filled your entire frame has vanished from view without moving an inch. Curiosity naturally loops back on itself. If the solar system extends this far, how does it compare to the distances between stars? If the Sun's influence stretches nearly to light years, how much space lies between these gravitational bubbles? Where does one system truly end and another begin? The questions arise not because answers are missing, but because scale has already outrun intuition. At this stage, the solar system no longer feels like a neighborhood. It feels like a territory. A vast, sparsely populated region defined more by gravity than by objects. Earth is a detail within that territory, not a defining feature. This realization carries a quiet finality. Earth is now functionally lost within its own system. Not because it is unimportant, but because the system itself has grown beyond the limits of personal relevance. The sense of ownership fades. The idea that this is our solar system begins to feel symbolic rather than literal. And yet, this is still not where scale reaches its breaking point. Because even a solar system that stretches nearly to another star is still just one structure among many. Beyond this boundary lies a domain where distance stops being measured in millions or billions of miles and starts being measured in years of light. The moment Earth disappeared from its own system was not the end of the journey. It was the threshold. Once distance becomes the dominant feature, scale changes character. Size no longer matters in the way it once did. Objects can be enormous and still feel irrelevant if they are far enough away. This is the shift that defines interstellar space. After the outer edge of the solar system, there are no gradual transitions, no stepping stones of familiarity. There is only separation so vast that even the idea of between starts to lose meaning. The nearest star to the Sun is Proxima Centauri, and it is more than 4 light-years away. A light-year is not a unit of time, even though it sounds like one. It is a unit of distance, the length light travels in a single year, nearly 6 trillion miles. Multiply that by 4, and you begin to approach the gap to the closest neighboring star. Numbers at this scale stop helping very quickly. They stack without producing intuition. What matters is what they imply. If Earth were shrunk to the size of a grain of sand and the Sun to a small marble, the distance between them would already feel excessive. Now imagine placing the next marble representing Proxima Centauri several miles away. That is not an exaggeration. It is a faithful compression. The solar system, which once felt enormous, collapses into a point lost in that gap. This is where time enters the conversation in a new way. Even at extraordinary speeds, distance refuses to yield. Voyager 1, the fastest and farthest human-made object, has been traveling for decades. It has not yet reached a single star. At its current speed, it would take tens of thousands of years to approach Proxima Centauri, not to orbit it, not to land, or to pass nearby. Civilizations rise and fall in a fraction of that time. Imagine what that means emotionally. Human ambition, ingenuity, and effort are measured in years, decades, generations. Interstellar distance is measured in spans that make those units feel fragile. Even if technology advanced dramatically, even if you could travel at a fraction of the speed of light, the journey would still take lifetimes. Distance here is not an obstacle to overcome. It is a defining condition. Space between stars is not filled with objects. It is not a dense field waiting to be crossed. It is emptiness on a scale that dwarfs everything that exists within it. Stars themselves become islands, separated by oceans of nothing so wide that light. The fastest thing in the universe takes years to cross from one shore to another. From Earth, the night sky does not communicate this truth. Stars appear sprinkled evenly across a dark canvas, close enough to form patterns. Constellations trick the mind into seeing structure where none exists. Those stars are not neighbors. They are scattered at wildly different distances, separated by gaps so large that the patterns you see dissolve the moment you move from your single vantage point. Isolation becomes unavoidable here. Each star system is alone in a way that is difficult to internalize. The solar system does not sit in a crowded cluster. It drifts through a sparse region of the galaxy, where the nearest stars are unimaginably far away. The idea of a connected cosmos gives way to one of separation punctuated by rare points of light. Earth, in this context, feels doubly isolated. It is not just a small planet orbiting an ordinary star. It is a small planet orbiting a star that is itself isolated, moving through a region of space where contact with anything else is effectively impossible on human timescales. Even signals, traveling at the speed of light, take years to arrive and years to be answered. time dilation becomes experiential rather than theoretical. When you think about distance in light years, you are also thinking about looking into the past. The light you see from the nearest stars left them years ago. From more distant ones, it left centuries or millennia ago. Space is not just empty, it is layered with time. Every direction you look is a record of what once was, not what is. This has a quiet, humbling effect. Earth's entire history, from its formation to now, fits comfortably within a few dozen light years. Beyond that, you are looking at stars whose light began its journey before humans existed. Before complex life emerged, before Earth itself settled into its current form. Distance erases simultaneity. The universe is not experienced all at once. It is experienced through delay. The sun, which once dominated every comparison, now shrinks again. From a few light years away, it is just another point of light. Earth disappears completely. Not hidden, not obscured, simply too small and too close to its star to be detected. Even if you knew exactly where to look, there would be nothing to see. This is existential humility in its purest form. Not humiliation, not despair, but a recalibration of significance. Earth does not feel dismissed. It feels private. Its dramas unfold unnoticed in a vast silence. Nothing beyond the solar system is watching. Nothing nearby is responding. Existence here is not validated by scale or connection. And yet, this isolation does not feel hostile. It feels neutral. Space is not empty because it lacks purpose. It is empty because that is how the universe is structured. Matter is rare. Distance is the default. Stars are exceptions, not the rule. Once you accept this, a strange clarity emerges. The universe is not crowded with meaning, waiting to be discovered. Meaning is something that arises locally within small pockets of complexity, surrounded by immense quiet. Earth is one of those pockets. Small, yes. Isolated, yes. But not diminished by that fact. The realization settles slowly. The solar system is not part of a continuous chain of worlds. It is one node among many, separated by distances so great that interaction is more theoretical than practical. Interstellar space is not a corridor. It is a gulf. As this understanding takes hold, scale stops feeling like a ladder you climb and starts feeling like an ocean you float within. There is no center you can point to, no edge you can reach. Only vast separations punctuated by rare structures, each carrying its own local meaning. Earth is still here. The sun still shines. Life still unfolds. But now it does so in the context of a universe where connection is rare. Travel is prohibitive, and distance defines reality more than size ever did. This is not the end of the widening frame. It is the moment where size loses its power and distance takes over completely. And beyond this, even stars themselves will begin to blur into something larger, something that strips individuality away entirely. Once the galaxy enters the frame, individuality begins to dissolve. Distance alone was enough to isolate stars from one another, but scale now strips them of identity entirely. What once felt like singular points of light become components of a structure so vast that counting loses meaning. The Milky Way is not a collection of stars you could ever hope to know. It is a system in which stars cease to matter as individuals at all. From within it, the galaxy feels invisible. The night sky offers no sense of its full shape or size. You see fragments, thin slices of light stretched across darkness, never the whole. Only by stepping outside the limits of direct experience does the structure emerge. The Milky Way is a spiral galaxy roughly 100,000 light-years across, containing somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. Even those numbers resist comprehension. They are estimates, not counts, because the idea of counting so many objects borders on absurd. At this scale, stars are no longer destinations. They are statistics. The Sun, which once dominated Earth's sky and then lost its dominance to Jupiter, now loses its individuality altogether. It is not special here. It is not large. It is not central. It is one ordinary star among hundreds of billions, tucked into a minor spiral arm far from the galaxy's center. Imagine compressing the Milky Way down to something you could see at once. If the galaxy were reduced to a disk 100 feet across, the entire solar system would be thinner than a human hair. Earth would be smaller than anything you could represent physically. Not a dot, not a grain. It would fall below the scale of representation entirely. At this level, Earth does not just disappear. It ceases to be a meaningful concept. This is scale compression at its most extreme. Vastness forces reduction. When a system grows large enough, detail vanishes. Individual stories collapse into patterns. The Milky Way does not care which stars host planets, which planets host life, or which civilizations rise and fall. Those distinctions are swallowed by volume. The galaxy itself is structured, but not in a way that centers anything familiar. A dense core lies at the center, packed with stars orbiting rapidly around a supermassive black hole. Spiral arms extend outward, filled with gas, dust, and star formation. Between those arms lie quieter regions where stars drift in relative isolation. The Sun resides in one of those quieter suburbs, far from the action, far from anything that might feel important. Even time changes meaning here. The Sun takes about 225 million years to complete a single orbit around the galactic center. That span is called a galactic year. In the time it takes for one revolution, entire eras of life appear and vanish on Earth. Dinosaurs emerge and disappear. Continents rearrange themselves. Species rise and fall without the galaxy noticing at all. Earth has completed only about 20 such orbits since it formed. 20 galactic years. That is the entirety of Earth's existence reduced to a small number you can count on your fingers. The universe itself has existed for roughly 60 galactic years. These are not numbers meant to impress. They are numbers meant to reframe. Earth's long history compresses into something brief when placed inside the rhythms of the galaxy. From this vantage point, the idea of significance shifts again. Earth is not small because it lacks size. It is small because it lacks influence at this scale. The Milky Way does not respond to Earth. It does not register its presence. The processes that shape the galaxy operate independently of anything that happens on a single planet. Even stars lose permanence here. They are born, live, and die as part of a continuous cycle. Massive stars burn quickly and explode as supernova, seeding the galaxy with heavier elements. Smaller stars persist longer, quietly fusing hydrogen for trillions of years. The Sun sits somewhere in the middle, neither ancient nor young, neither exceptional nor rare. When stars explode, the galaxy absorbs the event without disruption. When clusters form, they disperse over time. The Milky Way is not built from stable components. It is a dynamic flow of matter and energy, governed by gravity on enormous scales. Individual stars matter only insofar as they contribute to that flow. Abstraction becomes unavoidable. You cannot picture hundreds of billions of stars interacting over tens of thousands of light years. The mind retreats to patterns, spirals, densities. The galaxy becomes a shape rather than a place, a process rather than a collection of things. At this level, ego dissolves quietly, not because you are confronted with hostility or insignificance, but because the framework that once supported personal relevance no longer applies. Earth does not sit inside the galaxy the way a city sits inside a country. It exists more like a molecule inside an ocean, present, real, but irrelevant to the behavior of the whole. The Sun's light, which once defined day and night, now feels faint. From across the galaxy, it would be indistinguishable from countless other stars. Earth would not be hidden behind distance. It would simply not appear. Too small, too dim, too close to its star to stand out against the background. This is not erasure. It is proportion. The galaxy is not hostile to Earth. It is indifferent to it. And indifference at this scale carries no judgment. It simply reflects the reality that structures of this size do not accommodate individual importance. What remains is a strange calm. The urgency that clung to earlier comparisons begins to fade. When Earth disappears entirely, there is nothing left to defend. No position to protect. No center to reclaim. The need to matter on a cosmic scale loosens its grip. The Milky Way is not watching. It is not aware. It is not a stage built for stories. It is a vast, rotating system shaped by gravity and time, within which stories occasionally arise and then vanish without trace. Earth is one of those stories. And yet, the galaxy itself is not the end of scale. As overwhelming as it feels, it is still just one structure among many. The dissolution you feel here is temporary. Because once galaxies themselves begin to cluster and combine, even something as large as the Milky Way will begin to shrink. For now, let this level settle. A universe where stars lose names, where the sun becomes ordinary. Where Earth disappears without movement or destruction, simply because scale has outgrown it. This is what happens when the frame widens far enough. Meaning does not vanish. It detaches from size. And in that detachment, a different kind of understanding begins to form. When time is measured the way humans measure it, history feels immense. Generations blur into one another. Centuries feel distant and heavy. 1,000 years carries weight, enough to separate the present from myth. Civilizations rise, spread, fracture, and collapse, leaving behind monuments and stories that feel permanent simply because they outlast individual lives. From within that frame, human history feels long, dense, and significant. Galactic time does not share that frame. Once you place Earth's story inside the rhythm of the Milky Way, the scale of time stretches so far that familiar markers lose their meaning. A single orbit of the Sun around the center of the galaxy takes roughly 225 million years. That span is not an abstract figure. It is a unit of motion, a full cycle within a structure so vast that even light requires 100,000 years to cross it. This means that what humans call history occupies an almost invisible slice of galactic time. Recorded human civilization extends back perhaps 10,000 years. Compared to a galactic year, that is a fraction of a percent. It is not a chapter. It is not even a sentence. It is a fleeting moment, thinner than a pause. The entire history of complex life on Earth stretches back around 600 million years. That feels enormous when viewed from within biology. Long enough for oceans to fill with diversity, for creatures to rise from water, take to land, and reshape the planet's surface. Yet even that entire biological saga fits into less than 3 galactic years. Life as we recognize it has barely begun a third orbit around the Milky Way. Dinosaurs dominated Earth for over 160 million years. To human intuition, that is an unfathomably long reign. In galactic terms, it is not even a full year. Dinosaurs rose, ruled, and vanished before the sun completed a single journey around the galaxy. Their extinction, which feels cataclysmic from Earth's perspective, registers as a brief fluctuation against a background that barely noticed. Go further back. Earth itself formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That span feels vast beyond language. And yet, Earth has completed only about 20 galactic orbits since it came into being. 20 revolutions. You could count them without strain. Everything that has ever happened on this planet fits into those few cycles. This is temporal reframing at its most unsettling. It is not that events disappear. A key, It is that their duration collapses when placed inside a larger clock. What once felt ancient becomes brief. What once felt permanent becomes transient. Entire eras compress into flickers. Human civilization occupies the last thin edge of Earth's timeline. Agriculture, cities, writing, science, industry, and digital life all unfold within a fraction of a galactic year. If you represented Earth's entire history as a single calendar year, modern civilization would appear in the final seconds before midnight. If you then placed that calendar within the galaxy's timeline, it would vanish entirely. This compression does something profound to the idea of progress. From inside history, change feels dramatic. Technologies transform societies. Empires expand and collapse. Knowledge accumulates. From a galactic perspective, these changes are indistinguishable from noise. The galaxy does not experience progress. It experiences motion. Species are equally fragile under this lens. More than 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth are extinct. Most appeared, adapted briefly, and disappeared without leaving a trace that would survive geological time. Their entire existence fits into intervals so short that they blur together when viewed from afar. Even humanity, for all its complexity and self-awareness, occupies a razor-thin slice of time. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. That feels substantial until you compare it to the age of the galaxy. In that context, humanity has existed for about 1,000% of a single galactic year. A blink that has not yet finished blinking. This perspective shock is not meant to diminish accomplishment or meaning. It is meant to clarify proportion. Human history feels large because it is dense with experience, not because it is long. Meaning is concentrated, not extended. The intensity of lived moments tricks the mind into equating importance with duration. Galactic time exposes that illusion gently but firmly. It shows that duration and significance are not the same thing. Long processes can be empty. Brief moments can be rich. The universe does not measure value by how long something lasts. The Milky Way has existed for over 13 billion years. During that time, stars have formed and died in cycles that repeat without memory. Entire generations of stars burned through their fuel before Earth even existed. Others will continue long after Earth is gone. The galaxy's timeline is not centered on life, let alone on human life. Life appears within it as a temporary configuration, not a goal. Once this sinks in, urgency begins to loosen its grip. The pressures that dominate daily thought start to feel compressed, crowded into a frame that is suddenly much smaller than it once seemed. Not unimportant, but no longer absolute. When you realize that entire civilizations vanish between ticks of a galactic clock, the demand that any single moment carry ultimate weight begins to soften. Humility arises naturally here. Not as self-negation, but as realism. Humans are not latecomers in a story waiting for them to arrive. They are participants in a process that was underway long before they existed and will continue long after they are gone. History is not building toward a climax centered on Earth. It is unfolding as one thread among countless others. This does not erase responsibility or meaning. It reframes them. Meaning becomes local rather than cosmic. Responsibility becomes relational rather than universal. What matters does not need to matter forever to matter now. When viewed through galactic time, Earth's past feels brief. Earth's present feels fragile. And Earth's future feels open rather than guaranteed. There is no assurance of continuation written into the structure of the galaxy. Stability is temporary. Conditions shift. Orbits change. Stars evolve. The shock comes not from realizing how small humanity is, but from realizing how narrow the window of existence truly is. Life is not spread evenly across time. It appears in bursts, occupies small intervals, and disappears again. Earth happens to be in one of those intervals now. As this understanding settles, the story of Earth becomes quieter. Not because it is less interesting, but because it no longer competes with the scale that surrounds it. It exists within a vast temporal ocean where most moments are empty of narrative, punctuated by rare pockets of complexity. Human history is one of those pockets. Dense, vivid, and brief. And this realization prepares the mind for the next expansion, because just as individual lives vanish inside human history, and human history vanishes inside galactic time, the galaxy itself will soon be placed inside a frame where its billions of years and billions of stars compress into something equally fleeting. Time, like size and distance before it, will continue to collapse as the scale widens. At some point, even galaxies stop feeling like the fundamental units of the universe. They feel too solid, too discrete, too individual. When the frame widens far enough, galaxies begin to blur together into something larger and stranger, a structure that no one ever intuited by looking at the night sky. The universe, it turns out, is not arranged like scattered lights on a dark field. It has architecture. When astronomers began mapping the positions of galaxies on the largest scales, a pattern emerged that no one expected. Galaxies were not evenly distributed. They were not randomly scattered. They traced long, delicate threads across space, clustering along vast filaments that stretched for hundreds of millions of light years. Between these filaments lay enormous empty regions called voids, volumes of space so sparsely populated that entire galaxies were rare within them. This pattern is known as the cosmic web, and it fundamentally changes how scale is understood. The universe is not a collection of isolated galaxies floating in emptiness. It is a network. Matter flows along invisible highways shaped by gravity, gathering where filaments intersect and thinning out where gravity's pull is weakest. What once felt like countless independent systems is revealed as a single interconnected structure. At this level, galaxies lose their individuality. The Milky Way is no longer a destination or a home. It is a node, one concentration of matter among tens of thousands, embedded within a filament that spans unimaginable distances. Its spiral arms, its stars, its history, all dissolve into a statistical contribution to a much larger pattern. The voids are as important as the filaments. They dominate the universe by volume. Most of space is not where galaxies are, but where they are not. These voids can span hundreds of millions of light years. Regions where gravity pulled matter away toward denser areas long ago. If you were somehow placed at the center of one of these voids, the universe would look profoundly empty. The nearest major structures would lie so far away that the sky would feel barren, almost lifeless. This emptiness is not accidental. It is the natural outcome of gravity acting over immense time. In the early universe, matter was distributed almost evenly, with tiny variations in density. Over billions of years, those slight differences were amplified. Regions with a little more matter pulled in more, growing denser. Regions with a little less lost what they had, becoming emptier. The universe organized itself not into clumps alone, but into a vast cellular structure of walls and gaps. Systems thinking becomes unavoidable here. You cannot understand any single galaxy without understanding its position within the web. Galaxies form, evolve, and move under the influence of the structures they inhabit. They flow along filaments toward dense clusters, merging, interacting, and reshaping one another as part of a collective motion that spans supercluster scales. Even motion itself changes meaning. Galaxies are not just drifting randomly through space. They are participating in large-scale flows, moving toward regions of greater gravitational pull. Entire clusters of galaxies stream toward massive concentrations of matter, pulled not by a single object, but by the combined mass of structures so large they defy simple description. From this vantage point, the idea of isolation vanishes. Earlier, stars felt isolated from one another. Solar systems felt disconnected. Even galaxies felt like islands separated by dark oceans. Now those islands are revealed to be connected beneath the surface, part of a continental structure stretching across the observable universe. Intellectual awe arises not from sheer size alone, but from coherence. The universe is not chaotic at this scale. It is ordered in a way that feels almost biological, like a nervous system or a circulatory network, though it is neither. The resemblance is not design, but consequence. Simple physical laws applied over immense distances and times produce complexity that mirrors patterns found in living systems. This realization strips away another layer of anthropocentric thinking. The large-scale structure of the universe was not shaped by life, awareness, or intention. It was shaped by gravity acting on matter in an expanding space. Life appears within this structure, not as a goal, but as a local phenomenon, emerging in rare pockets where conditions align. Galaxies themselves become ephemeral here. They form within filaments, grow through mergers, and eventually fade as star formation slows. Clusters assemble and disperse over billions of years. Nothing at this scale is static. The web evolves, stretches, thins, and rearranges as the universe expands. If you compress the universe's visible structure into a manageable image, the Milky Way becomes indistinguishable from its neighbors. It is not larger, brighter, or more central than most. It occupies one position along one filament among countless others. Its entire history contributes almost nothing to the shape of the web. Earth, needless to say, is beyond relevance here. Not small, not hidden, conceptually absent. The scale is so vast that even stars vanish into averages. The universe is no longer described in terms of objects you could ever visit, but in terms of density fields, flows, and distributions. This is where abstraction fully takes over. You stop asking where something is and start asking how matter behaves in aggregate. The universe becomes a statistical object, describable only through large-scale surveys and models. Individual stories dissolve into trends. And yet, this abstraction does not feel cold. There is a quiet beauty in realizing that everything you have considered so far fits into a structure of astonishing elegance. The same gravity that binds you to Earth binds galaxies into clusters and filaments into webs. The laws that govern a falling object govern the architecture of the universe itself. Pattern revelation has a grounding effect. It shows that scale does not lead to randomness or meaninglessness. It leads to structure. The universe is not a scatter of accidents. It is a system unfolding according to simple rules across unimaginable distances. At this level, all becomes intellectual rather than emotional. It is the recognition that the universe is comprehensible in principle, even if it is overwhelming in practice. That coherence exists without intention. That complexity emerges without guidance. Galaxies no longer feel like homes or destinations. They feel like expressions of a deeper order. Their shapes, motions, and interactions are dictated by where they sit within the web, not by anything intrinsic to them alone. As you sit with this, notice how far the frame has expanded. Earth disappeared earlier. The sun followed. Individual stars lost meaning. Galaxies held on briefly, then dissolved into patterns. What remains is not emptiness, but structure on a scale so large that identity itself becomes irrelevant. And still, this is not the largest frame available, because even the cosmic web, vast and intricate as it is, occupies only a portion of what can be seen. It exists within a horizon defined not by structure, but by time itself. Beyond that horizon lies more universe, unreachable, not because of distance alone, but because light itself has not had time to arrive. The web is not the end of scale. It is the threshold of the observable. And what happens beyond that boundary will force the frame to widen one last time, When the frame expands to include everything that can be seen, a final boundary appears. Not a wall, not an edge in space, but a limit imposed by time itself. This is the observable universe, the region from which light has had enough time to reach us since the universe began. It is not the whole universe. 'Tis only the part that has made itself visible. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old. At first glance, that suggests we should be able to see 13.8 billion light-years in every direction. But space has been expanding the entire time. While light has been traveling, the fabric of the universe has been stretching, carrying distant galaxies farther away. The result is counterintuitive. The observable universe is not 13 billion light-years across. It is about 93 billion light-years in diameter. That number alone reframes everything that came before it. The cosmic web, with its filaments and voids, fits inside this vast sphere. Every galaxy you have imagined, every structure that dissolved into abstraction, exists within this horizon. And yet, this horizon is not a physical boundary. It is a moment frozen in time. Beyond it, the universe continues, but its light has not arrived. This creates a profound shift in how reality is understood. You are not seeing the universe as it is now. You are seeing it as it was. The farther you look, the further back in time you see. Distant galaxies appear young, compact, and chaotic because you are witnessing them in their infancy. Nearby galaxies appear mature because their light left more recently. Space becomes inseparable from time. The cosmic horizon introduces mystery without speculation. It is a limit grounded in physics, not imagination. There are places that exist right now whose light will never reach Earth, no matter how long you wait. Space beyond a certain distance is receding faster than light can cross it, not because anything is breaking the rules, but because space itself is expanding. Those regions are not hidden. They are causally disconnected. Within the observable universe, astronomers estimate there are about 2 trillion galaxies. Not stars. Galaxies. Each one containing anywhere from millions to trillions of stars. The total number of stars is so large that it defies ordinary comparison. Hundreds of billions of trillions. Numbers lose their meaning here, not because they are inaccurate, but because the mind has no remaining anchors. If every star were represented by a grain of sand, you would need oceans to hold them. If every galaxy were a single point, the sky would still be crowded beyond comprehension. And yet, all of this abundance occupies only a fraction of what may exist. This is where boundary framing becomes unavoidable. The observable universe feels total because it contains everything you can, even in principle, observe. But observation is not existence. The horizon marks the limit of information, not the limit of reality. The universe does not end where your view ends. Cosmologists do not know how much larger the universe is beyond what we can see. It may be only a few times larger than the observable region. It may be thousands of times larger. It may be infinite. Current observations cannot decide between these possibilities. The data simply does not extend far enough. This uncertainty is not a failure of knowledge. It is an honest boundary. Physics allows the universe beyond our horizon to exist, but denies us access to it. No telescope, no signal, no future technology can overcome this limit. It is built into the structure of space-time itself. If the universe is infinite, then the observable universe, for all its vastness, represents 0% of what exists. 93 billion light-years would be nothing more than a small bubble in an endless expanse. Even if the universe is finite but unimaginably large, the same conclusion holds. What you see is not the whole. This realization renews curiosity rather than closing it. It shifts questions away from size and toward context. Where does our region sit within the larger whole? Are the laws of physics the same everywhere? Do structures repeat beyond our horizon? Or does something fundamentally different emerge? Some theories suggest that what we call the universe may be one region within a much larger multiverse, a collection of expanding domains, each with its own properties. These ideas arise not from imagination alone, but from attempts to understand inflation, quantum mechanics, and the early universe. They remain speculative because there is no way to test them observationally. What matters here is not whether these ideas are true, but what their possibility implies. Even the observable universe, the largest structure you can meaningfully discuss with evidence, may be a small part of something far greater. The hierarchy of scale has not ended. It has simply reached the limits of verification. Standing at this boundary produces a distinct emotional shift. Earlier expansions diminished Earth, the Sun, stars, and galaxies through comparison. This boundary does something different. It does not shrink what lies within. It places it inside a larger unknown. The observable universe feels complete and incomplete at the same time. Complete because it contains everything that has ever influenced us. Incomplete because it almost certainly does not contain everything that exists. That tension is not something to resolve. It is something to hold. The expansion of space ensures that this horizon will never disappear. As time passes, distant galaxies will cross beyond it, their light fading forever. The observable universe will shrink in terms of what can be seen, even as the universe itself continues to expand. There will come a time when only our local group of galaxies remains visible, the rest lost to cosmic isolation. From that future perspective, the universe will feel smaller, quieter, more empty. Not because it has changed, but because access to information has diminished. Scale will collapse inward again, not physically, but observationally. Even the grandeur you are contemplating now is temporary. This adds another layer to perspective. The universe is not only vast, it is dynamic in what it allows to be known. What you can see today will not always be visible. What you cannot see now may exist regardless. At this final visible edge, curiosity renews itself in a different form. Not a desire to conquer or reach, but a willingness to accept limits. The universe does not offer total comprehension. It offers glimpses bounded by time, light, and expansion. And within those bounds lies everything you have considered so far. Earth, the Sun, the galaxy, the cosmic web. All of it contained within a horizon that itself floats inside something larger, unseen and perhaps unseeable. This is not a conclusion. It is a pause. The moment where scale stops expanding through evidence and begins expanding through implication. The universe has allowed you to see enough to know that what you see is not all there is. There is a quiet discipline required here, a restraint that scale demands. The mind wants closure, an edge it can touch, a final answer that stabilizes understanding. The observable universe denies that comfort. It teaches that reality is larger than access, that certainty has a horizon, just like light does. What lies beyond may never matter to daily life, yet knowing it exists changes how everything within the horizon feels. Limits do not diminish wonder. They define it. And at this boundary, curiosity does not end. It matures, turning from accumulation toward reflection, from expansion toward acceptance, from knowing more toward understanding what it means to know it all. This is where perspective finally rests, open, unresolved, and quietly transformative. Forever. At the end of this widening journey, nothing about you has physically changed. You are still where you were when it began. Earth still turns beneath your feet. The sun still rises and sets. Life continues with the same immediacy and texture it always had. And yet, the frame through which all of that is seen has quietly shifted. Insignificance, when first encountered, often feels like loss, a stripping away of importance, a removal from the center. But what scale reveals is something more subtle. Being non-central is not the same as being meaningless. In fact, centrality carries a weight that perspective gently releases. For most of human history, meaning was tied to position. To be at the center was to matter most. To be chosen, watched, essential to the structure of reality itself. Scale dissolves that idea without replacing it with emptiness. It simply removes the need for cosmic validation. The universe does not revolve around you, and in that realization, a quiet freedom emerges. When nothing is required to be central, everything is allowed to be local. Meaning no longer needs to be universal to be real. It can exist where it arises, shaped by context, relationship, and experience, rather than by permanence or reach. The smallness revealed by scale does not erase value. It refines it. Earth is small, yes. But it is not insignificant in the way a grain of dust is insignificant to a machine. It is insignificant to the motion of galaxies, to the structure of the cosmic web, to the expansion of the universe itself. And that distinction matters. Those vast processes do not require meaning. They operate without awareness or intention. Life does not compete with them. It exists alongside them, answering different questions. The universe does not ask what matters. It only answers how things behave. Meaning arises elsewhere, in minds capable of reflection, in relationships capable of care, in moments capable of being felt. These things do not scale upward. They intensify inward. When you release the expectation that existence must justify itself on a cosmic stage, a different sense of proportion takes hold. Worry begins to soften, not because problems disappear, but because they are no longer required to be ultimate. Urgency loses its edge. Fear loses its permanence. Even joy becomes quieter and deeper, less performative, less dependent on comparison. Smallness becomes a form of shelter, a place where nothing needs to last forever to be worth tending, where experiences do not need to echo across galaxies to be complete, where significance is not measured by endurance, but by presence. The universe is vast enough to hold indifference without hostility. It does not diminish what it does not notice. It simply does not participate. And that non-participation leaves space for something else to grow, something that does not need cosmic endorsement to exist. In this frame, Earth is not tragic in its smallness. It is intimate. A narrow band of complexity surrounded by immense quiet. A place where matter briefly organizes itself into thought, memory, and care. Not because the universe demanded it, but because conditions allowed it. That allowance is enough. Scale does not tell you that nothing matters. It tells you that meaning is not imposed from above. It emerges from within, from awareness encountering limitation, from time that is finite, from connections that cannot be repeated infinitely, and therefore cannot be postponed indefinitely. The fear that sometimes accompanies smallness comes from imagining that importance must be large to be real. But scale reveals the opposite. Large structures are indifferent. They persist without concern. It is the small, the fragile, the temporary that carry significance precisely because it does not endure without effort. Nothing about this perspective requires despair. Despair comes from loss of agency, from feeling erased or replaced. Scale does not erase you. It contextualizes you. It removes the burden of needing to matter to everything, so that you can matter fully to something. There is no final answer waiting at the edge of this understanding. No conclusion that ties everything together neatly. The universe does not resolve into meaning the way stories do. It opens outward, leaving interpretation to those capable of reflection. That openness is not a flaw. It is an invitation. You are not small because you are unimportant. You are small because you are specific, located, temporal, bounded. Those limits do not diminish experience. They define it. Without them, Nothing could be felt. Nothing could be valued. Nothing could end, and therefore, nothing could matter. Perspective does not remove mystery. It clarifies where mystery belongs, not as something to conquer, but as something to coexist with. The universe is larger than comprehension, and that does not threaten understanding. It humbles it, making room for curiosity without demand. At this scale, there is no pressure to conclude, no need to arrive at certainty. The widening frame does not point toward an answer. It points toward a stance. One that accepts that existence does not require justification beyond being lived. You are here briefly, within a universe that does not revolve around you, and that is not a problem to solve. It is a condition to inhabit. Earth will continue its quiet orbit. The galaxy will turn. Structures will stretch and thin. Long after this moment passes, the universe will remain indifferent. And within that indifference, life will continue to feel, to wonder, to care, for as long as conditions allow. That is not insignificance. That is perspective. And perspective, once gained, does not need to be held tightly. It does not need to be remembered constantly. It settles into the background, altering how things feel rather than how they appear. It does not demand action or belief. It simply widens the space in which experience unfolds. There is nothing more to add. The scale does not close. It remains open, quiet, and vast. And within it, small lives continue, not diminished by the universe around them, but framed by it in a way that allows meaning to exist without needing to be infinite.